Okay, so my guest today is Lorenzo Fornaroli, and he is a senior leader in global logistics with 28 years of experience across a variety of industries, markets, and company cultures with a focus on continuous improvement, third-party logistics management, and end-to-end supply chain optimization functions. Lorenzo started his career in Italy in international trade and progressed to leadership roles in multinationals and startups in the UK and Switzerland. Companies like IBM, HP, P&G, Honeywell, Cisco, and he also spent three years at Huawei's HQ in China. He's currently supporting a startup business and is a member of multiple supply chain innovation groups. He's joining us today from Switzerland. Thank you, Lorenzo, for taking the time to join us.
Good morning, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here.
So the first question I want to ask you, because this is the question I've asked everybody that we have speaking on this event, what was it that inspired you initially to go into international business?
First of all, my studies. I studied at the time a mix of international trade, accounting, and IT. So that's what led me to learn a little bit more what was happening with international trade outside of my country. I've always had a flair for languages and for what happens from a cultural point of view outside of my country. So that was the trigger to start working in an international environment. And of course, then I developed a little bit more my experience from Italy to other countries. So it's been a passion that has been throughout my life. It's also an interesting opportunity for those who like to travel to get to see a lot of the world while you're doing business. Maybe you don't see the sexy places because you get to go to ports and the warehousing facilities or inside aircrafts and stuff, but it's interesting to see what's going on in terms of international trade relationships and human relationships as well when you work with different cultures. So this has been my motivating factor at the beginning, and I'm glad I've done it. I've started from very, very low levels, working in the afternoons in a warehouse, and then growing a little bit and progressing across different roles and functions, like you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. This for me also was one of the motivations about going into international trade, to have this kind of real experience of other places, not just the tourist places that it's nice to visit. They're great as well, but to also see really how people are living and working in the day-to-day lives. Yeah. So when we're talking about managing the global logistics operations, I know that a lot of companies, they kind of fall into international business. They get an inquiry from somewhere overseas, and the sales department is happy and they think, oh, great, we can go international. And at the end of this whole process, then the supply chain is involved, or often they only get involved at the end. And, you know, in German, they have this saying that the ones at the end of any process are the ones who get bitten by the dogs, because
unfortunately, it's very true, I have to say.
Yes, because you have to solve any problems that have been caused further up in the process. So at which point do you suggest that a company gets their supply chain and logistics guys involved when they start to talk about international business?
I think as early as possible, because this is something that happens everywhere. It's happened in many companies that I work with. It's happening in small companies, big ones. In general, sales guys do their job. They want to sell, they want to promote the sales, so they want to extend their networks, so they want to expand, grow revenues. Nowadays with technology, of course, it's even easier. Obviously, selling something, you're not selling the product, you're selling a commitment, you're selling a promise, you're generating an expectation with the customer. Obviously, then you have to make it happen. So you have to have this certain reliability between the promise you made and the actual execution. So this is when logistics and operations management come into place. So you have to be involved as early as possible to be able to know what we are promising to the customer, at what cost, what transit time, what shipping method, are we understanding the local market. So I think there's a lot of things we need to do to be ahead of the game, to make sure that all the functions within a company are aligned, so that there's no function that is ahead, and then it lets the job to be done only by the ones behind the in the back end of the operations, because then there would be inconsistencies. Then we'll have to go back to the customer and potentially correct an expectation, or we'll have to go and change the prices, or realize, oh, sorry, I promised something that we cannot fulfill, or rates have to go up, or the expectations around transit time is not correct. So there's a lot of things we should do from a very high level. There's a lot of tools and frameworks you can use. There's one that is called PEST, or PESTLE, P-E-S-T-L-E, which means having a global overview of the business you want to enter, the market you want to penetrate, whereby this PESTLE is an acronym for political, I brought a little note here, political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental requirements, so that you have a real understanding not only of the business specifics, but also of the local environment you want to enter, and understand what could be limitations or things you need to be aware of, so that all functions are kept ahead of the curve in terms of expectations management for the customer, so that you don't ruin your brand, your reputation, but also for yourself, so that you know how to make it work to get it right the first time. So there's a lot of awareness work that needs to be done, and a lot of communication and early engagement that are very beneficial for this. Consider compliance, consider a lot of factors that come into place to generate which are the drivers of excellent performance, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll dig into a couple of those
Sure.
a little bit later. But what would you say is the main difference for a company who's going abroad for the first time? What would you say is the main difference that they need to consider when they're expanding between their domestic market?
Well, obviously, domestic market is the market you probably know well. You know your customers, you know your international, you know your domestic network, you know your suppliers of logistics services, so you can control better your network. When you go international, you have to start understanding that the appreciation of your products may be different. You may have appreciation, meaning, are your products valued as well? Do you have to promote your products in a different way? How will the products be perceived? Sometimes just the name you have in your country may have a totally different meaning in another country. So you've got to be careful about subtle cultural implications, let's say.
Especially in China, yep.
Exactly, China, but also in Europe, there's a lot of games you can play with the names that mean something totally different. So you got to be careful around that. Otherwise, reputation you'll be laughed at. Let's say you have to think about more important things like the legal setup. What is the legal compliance requirements? What will be the total cost of ownership? Which means when I go and sell something abroad, that will have to be taken into consideration. Customs implications, delays in transit. How will the market perceive? If you think about the Japanese market, for example, they have a very strong point around quality. They're probably the best when it comes to quality management. It's all coming from there. So you got to have clear awareness of how the perception of your products will be and how you can penetrate the market with the real awareness of how you will be perceived in that market. So you have to do some work, some preparation work to understand what is a driver of performance or a driver of appreciation in another market that may not be the same as the one you're currently working in. And so consider other more operational aspects such as cost, transit times, which differ, and like I mentioned, compliance, tax implications. So a lot of things have to be taken into consideration when you go to a market that is not the one you're accustomed to.
Yeah, and I guess also you have to take a look a little bit at what's important for the market that you're delivering to, because one market might value rapid transit time or
exactly.
fast. Let's say one market might favor speed and the next market might be more cost conscious or something like this.
It is. And if I may just give an example, it's a very good example because when I studied for my master's degree, I learned very good academic thing, which is generic performance objectives, which is applicable to sales in general, not only to international sales, which means, like you say, what's generating an interest from the customer. You've got these 5 performance objectives: quality, speed, dependability, flexibility, and cost, which means you may, if you buy a daily product at the supermarket, you want product availability because you want to buy it now, you want to have it now. So stock availability is very important. If you're buying a piece of electronic, of course, you'll be willing to wait more time because you know that's the one you want, so you spend more time. If you buy a car, usually the lead time could be up to a month or 2 months or 3 months, but then you want the car you want. So the expectations are different, exactly, unless you buy one of those last-minute deals. So the expectations are different. So the generic performance objectives, seen from the customer perspective, from the customer side, are different depending on what you want. If you work, for example, like I did for quite a long time in the project business, dependability or reliability of service is key. Customers would always tell me, Lorenzo, I don't care if it's coming in 40 days or 60 days, as long as you are reliable, because I build my expectations and I build my project on your commitment. And there we go to the previous point about having the sales guys and the operations alignment. Because if you are delaying your delivery, you put the whole project on hold because all other steps of the project will be left out, will be delayed. So it's very important for some customers, reliability or dependability more than speed. They say, I don't mind speed, I don't need it tomorrow, but give me something that is reliable. For some others it's cost, for some others it's quality. So it's a mix of these five. So you need to be able to understand what is the driver of performance for that specific customer or for the different customers you are approaching, so that you know exactly how to invest in resources internally in your supply chain to make sure that you are not giving them what they do not need, or overspending in something that is not appreciated, or undersupplying them, meaning losing business. And of course, in an international context, is even more important because you've got the cultural environment and all the things that we discussed before with the little peso thing.
Yeah, and I think operations and supply chain, they're two of the most important building blocks, and they're the ones that people worry about. I mean, if I talk to clients, they worry about how to actually fulfill a physical order. How do they get the goods from A to B? It's probably the second biggest worry after how do I get my money. But often people, when they take, especially, I mean, I come from a sales environment, but I would say often sales teams underestimate how complex this part of the operation can be. So
it is.
Yeah, I mean, what are the most typical mistakes, or what are the biggest mistakes that you would warn people about if they're just starting out, that they really should look out for? Don't let your sales team overpromise on delivery and so on.
So I think, first of all, the main recommendation I would have, of course, you cannot get the operations guys out with customers from the first meeting, but at the same time, selling something to the customer too soon without having understood what it takes to make it happen could be an issue, because then, like I mentioned, you generate an expectation and then things may not be easy to achieve, or you would have probably overcommitted. So certainly I think engagement of the operations, what I did in my previous jobs, it was not easy because of course customers are territory of the sales guys, so they don't want to mingle with operations. Sometimes they say, I don't want you to come with us, we've got a special relationship with the customer, whatever. But it's very important for the ops guys to visit the customers, to understand their requirements, to make sure that when we are offering something in terms of lead time or costs, we understand exactly what it means. I'll give you a hint. Maybe you can have a look at, there's a little thing that I posted on LinkedIn about a year ago when I was traveling to Indonesia with my last job with Huawei. I noticed some of the real challenges we have in distribution to a country that is made of 17,000 islands. So when you're delivering, even in the city of Jakarta, for example, you've got traffic the whole day, non-stop.
Yes.
Imagine
Jakarta traffic is horrible.
Exactly. Imagine delivering to the islands. So you have to have several means of transportation. So we started having issues with availability of resources, or we didn't consider this in the transit time expectation, or the costs are going up, we don't have enough resources. Oh God, the goods have to go on a truck and then on a boat, and then they are hand carried up, especially depending on the products you're treating. Of course, we were handling with antennas for telecommunications. So of course, there's a lot that the operations have to be aware of ahead of time. So this is very much important. Like I mentioned, local requirements, so total cost control or prediction of the cost, transit time, which can vary depending on mode of transport. Think about local requirements. We talked about the Japanese standards for quality, which are probably the most important. Another one that I'm thinking about tapping into my my old time, I didn't have as many gray hair as now, but nevertheless, I still have some hair. That's important. That was with, when I was working with Gillette, I was working which was at the time Gillette, Oral-B, Duracell, and Brown, the 4 brands before the acquisition by P&G, was working as a transport optimization manager. So my job was to, I wouldn't say internal sales, but to raise awareness on how we could optimize the transportation, which means, say, I can ship it, say from Spain to the UK, I can ship it by truck, or I can ship it by sea, by short sea. If I ship it by truck, it's going to be more expensive, but it takes 5 days. If I ship it by sea, it will be less expensive, so you save money, you save on cost, but the transit time is probably 10 days. So what do you want? Do you want to save on transit time, or do you want to save on cost? And then what is the impact to working capital? How many goods do you have on a truck and how many do you have on a container? How long will the goods be in transit for? So what happens to the replenishment cycle? So there's a lot you have to consider. All these drivers are impacting customer experience and are impacting your internal drivers. So be very mindful about the physical transportation, but also, like I mentioned, the local expectations, compliance. You can think about, obviously the impact to cash flow. Another example that was with HP about 20 years ago or so. We launched a project to serve our retailers, our wholesalers and distributors with a sea freight program. Fantastic. So we thought, okay, we don't ship by air. We could afford with the air freight for very expensive items because cost of logistics is still relatively low. And also because products have a very short lifespan. If you think about products with a long lifespan, for example, cartridges or other products, we thought, okay, we can ship it by sea. By sea meant at the time 25, 28 days from Europe to the Middle East. Well, that means that I'm shipping the goods, I'm raising the invoice, and the customer is coming to me and say, Lorenzo, even before I get the goods, the invoice is already due for payment. So why don't we renegotiate the contract in a way that I will be charged only when the goods have at least arrived at destination? And by the way, when the products arrive at destination, the product is already obsolete because if you ship a PC by sea, it's already late when it has arrived at destination because new products will have been released. Maybe there's a new processor or a new IT upgrade that's coming up. So you've got to be careful about the transit time and how this impacts your choice, not only for the cost, but also for the cash flow impact. So there's a lot of things you have to consider when it comes to internationalizing your business. Obviously, also very important. You can do things like, think about the electronics business, for example. You can do whatever they call it, late customization or strategic postponement or localization, which means I configure a product at the very last minute. So I can put the plug and the instruction sheet in the language that meets the local requirements and put the plug if it's for the UK, for Germany, for Saudi Arabia, for China, whatever. Or I can set up a VMI hub, for example, vendor managed inventory, so that the products will be managed. The purchase and the transfer pricing will have an impact as well, without going into too many complications. But essentially, control the local rules and requirements and compliance, tax issues, but also the physical transportation and what that means to transit time and cost, because that's the one that are really impacting the real customer experience. Because they say, you gave me a promise, and I want to make sure that you deliver to what you committed to.
Yeah. I would also add to that, on top of, like, from my experience doing a lot of business in Asia with food, where of course you have a question of expiry dates and so on, that it's really essential to think about the whole supply chain, and not just what do I as a manufacturer need to consider from me through to my importer, but also to consider how much supply chain and how do they manage that supply chain until the product actually lands with the end consumer. And this whole planning process of, if I want to sell to a consumer, let's say for Christmas or for Chinese New Year, how many months do I have to work backwards in order to get to the production point, or in order to source my raw materials?
Yeah, and absolutely. And think about now what's happening with e-commerce, right? Of course, COVID has increased by far the access to e-commerce, but nevertheless, technology is a great enabler to improving business models, to reaching out to more customers. Fantastic. But at the same time, you generate an expectation online. So the customer comes and says, okay, I want to buy this product. So, well, what is the transit time? So you have to start building into the final cost, into the final landed cost model. Transit time expectations, costs, how much will it cost me? Do I have enough stock? Do I build a local warehouse to supply domestically to that market? Or do I do complete international shipment from my warehouse to the final customer? So it's going to be a sort of a B2C delivery, or will I ship to a temporary warehouse? So there's a lot of factors to consider, and technology plays a great help in having analytics insights, understanding how you can draw statistics that help you understand consumer data and so on. But at the same time, it's a commitment, because once it's out, you put it on the website, you generate an expectation. So technology helps you, but also forces you to be more transparent, so forces you to be more precise with your expectations, with the generation of expectations. Otherwise, customers will be disappointed. So you've got to be careful with that, yeah.
And how would you recommend a company who's inexperienced in this, all of these aspects? How would you recommend that they, if they're looking to build up a new system for internationalization, do you recommend that they should seek training? Should they look to employ experts or specialists, or do you recommend that they outsource part of these functions?
First of all, well, yes, certainly yes. I think it's a worthwhile investment, because you need to tap into someone who's got experience in the market, of the market that you're trying to get into. So, for example, in Geneva, where I've been based for the last number of years, apart from my 3-year thing in China, is ITC, for example, International Trade Center, which is somehow related to the UN. They help countries improve their export, so they provide training and everything. But of course, that's only one. You've got, like I mentioned, ITC, you've got Chamber of Commerce, you've got conversation with peers who are already present in the market, or who can give you idea about that. You can get local knowledge, but also you need to create somehow a structure around the risks that you would incur. So calculate risk management very carefully, which means raising awareness of the country you want to go to with experts, or with consulting companies, or with people who are already based there, or like I said, organizations that help international trade or commerce in general, but also learn how to prioritize, learn what is very important for you when you want to enter that market. What are the non-negotiable risks you can take, which means if this happens, we are out of business, or we're out of credibility in the market. Whereas on this one, there's a risk. How can I gauge the risk? How can I improve my predictability? So there's things that you can plan to also manage deviations, which means plan A doesn't work. What about plan B, plan C? So you need to be able to continually track costs. You need to be able to and you can do that with consulting companies, or with experts, or with organizations that can help you, or with somehow a local presence in the market. But you have to have some, as they call it, hyper awareness, which means aware of what the market's conditions are, so that you know exactly how to enter without failure, and how to gain, because it's all about customer intimacy, right? Once customers have bought and there's a certain trust, then you hopefully sell more and more. So you want to make sure you don't start with the wrong foot, otherwise you'll be, your image will be tarnished a bit.
Yeah, and I think in its most basic form, you're looking at how can I manage the risk, how can I manage the cost, and how can I manage let's say, the execution of this.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the most
you go from
simple model, let's say.
Yeah, and it is. Of course, it's very high level, like you say, Catherine, but it's very true, because you have a strategy, and then you say, what does it take to make it happen? Is it really executable? What are the risks? And it's funny, because once I was interviewed a year ago or so on another podcast, and this gentleman was asking me from Singapore, hey, Lorenzo, how about risk management? And I told him about my experience in previous companies, what we did and everything. And he said, so do you think you are 80, 85%? I said, I don't know, because if I knew what is 100%, then I would work on the remaining 15%, right? I can't tell you I'm at 85%. Well, then I know what the other 15 is. So I don't know. So you have to be as imaginative as possible, thinking about risks, because the moment you are complacent and you say, okay, I got it covered, something else will happen. And so you'll be penalized by not being enough risk averse. So plan for the worst. If it doesn't happen, good. If it happens, you do have a plan A or plan B. So, but it's difficult to feel comfortable about having covered all risks because you don't know what's going to happen. So you got to be very wary and very risk averse to plan this. So that means control your operations, control your activities, and be in control of everything through technology, through local knowledge, through operations performance, through metrics, and good relationships with your suppliers, which are also an integral part of your network.
Yeah, I mean, I think the topics of don't assume, and
yes.
you don't know what you don't know. These
exactly.
are like, this is like a recurring theme through all of the interviews that we've done for this summit, because if you're working in your domestic market, let's say it's easier to control the factors simply because you just have such a far deeper knowledge of all of the aspects of that market, and you're much closer to the ground. And any international market that you go into, even if you go from Switzerland into France or into Italy or Germany, then you don't have such an intimate knowledge of what's really happening as you would
think about
in your home market.
Now, I don't want to make any mistakes, but I think Switzerland is one of the very few countries, along with another one I can't remember, who calculates duty differently than others. There's a lot of things that impact your complete awareness of what's going on in your business. So you've got to be careful that you've calculated. You maybe create an FMEA or sort of failure mode and effect analysis and say, okay, if something goes wrong in this and this and this vertical areas of my vertical functions, what is my plan B? What would be my resiliency plan? And so you'll be readier you'll be more ready for resilience and not just be on your feet.
No, I was in a webinar this week from the Austrian Chamber of Commerce, whom they were talking about Brexit and talking about how Austrian exporters can manage this risk and can manage. And there were quite a number of companies who didn't realize that whether there is a deal or no deal, that after they've formally left the customs union, then the UK will be, let's say, a third country in some way, with maybe a deal in place, maybe not a deal in place, but that it's not the same as just delivering from Austria across the border to Germany. You have to do a customs, you have to take care of more operational details than in the past.
Of course, because and I think there's been also some statistics that show that the volumes of imports into the UK have increased recently because people are building stock. They say, just in case we got exposed to customs blockages or whatever happens with import clearance, at least we got some stock that allows us to survive, to continue our sales in the domestic market. So that's a good way to do some planning, for example. But then the question will be, okay, once your stock is over, do you know how to make it work? It's not easy because there's a lot of questions, a lot of studies have taken place around this. But certainly, things will change with Brexit, and many other things will. We all learned what happened with COVID this year, with a lot of changes to our supply chains. But also, I think it's important to manage in a very mature way all your partners, which means unless you manage the whole supply chain yourself, you probably have suppliers, maybe logistics suppliers. And so you need to be able to have a solid relationship with them because they're doing the work for you. So you have to have a good control of not only yourself, but also all your ecosystem, as they say, to make sure it works.
Yeah. And are there some specific KPIs? You mentioned working with external suppliers. If you're working with an external, I guess the most typical ones are you're working with an external warehouse supplier and you're working with an external logistics transportation company. What would be some factors if a company is looking for the first time for this kind of external support? What should they look out for? I know this is quite a broad, it's quite specific to industries, but what would be the general factors that they should look out for? And maybe some KPIs to consider.
Sure. So consider, for example, when you outsource your business, you give it to the specialist or the so-called specialist who can do the job for you, right? They are the experts. So you started off with a German thing, I'll tell you one in Italian, which means patti chiari amicizia lunga, which means when the pacts are clear, when the agreements are clear, you've got a long-standing friendship or long-standing relationship, which means at the beginning, you don't know each other. The supplier doesn't know you, you don't know your supplier. So you have to be as clear as possible with your expectations, with your service level agreement, with your cost structure, with your scenario planning, so that you give as much information as possible to your supplier, because your supplier doesn't know anything about your business. So your supplier may be very good at managing the logistics in your industry. They can handle warehousing operations, transportation. They will be certainly able to guide you and give you support. A lot of the big ones are also offering supply chain services, consulting of some kind, so they can help you with that as well. But at the same time, it's very important to have a clear contract, to have a clear expectation setting, which means having engagement within the company before you go out and outsource your business. Also, the logistics guys should learn how to gather data and information from other functions before they outsource the business to a logistics supplier, be this warehousing or transportation. So clarify what you want, your volumes. Is there a volume peaks? Is there, month-end, quarter-end peaks, seasonality, pricing? What is the organizational structure you're going to work with your logistics supplier? Usually they have an account management structure. Of course, it depends how big or small you are, but nevertheless, you're going to have a very clear communication standard so that you know who to go to if there's some escalations or operational issues, or if you want to go, or if they have to call you, they know who to get in touch with, they know who the experts are. Measurable risks and negotiable and non-negotiable, which means what are the things that you have to make happen no matter what, and what are the ones we can renegotiate. And then you have to be in control of your operations, and you can do that with metrics, and I'll give you a couple of examples in a second, because you run your business. Nobody knows your business better than you. Sometimes you don't know as much as you think you know, by the way, but which is what consultants sometimes tell you. They say, they ask you questions in a different way, so they make you realize that what you really want is not what you think, but maybe you want something different, but you are not able to articulate it. But also, assuming you know what your business is about, you have to share this with your supplier, because the suppliers don't know. So you have to share with them the nature of your business, fluctuations, volatility, risks, but also you have to learn from them, from their experience. So you call the experts who can help you with this. So you can predict business fluctuations, you can predict cost variance, and so on. So in terms of KPIs, with the years, I've developed my own sort of solution, which is around cost, volumes, and performance, which means they are all intertwined, because if say volumes go up, there will be an impact on cost. If costs go up or down, you will be able to understand what you can explain why the costs are changing. Is it the organic growth? So I'm spending more because I'm shipping more. That's great. Or I'm still shipping the same volumes, but I'm spending more. So what's wrong here? And what is the impact to performance, to service, to my customers? So the three pillars have to be continually intertwined. They have to be continually seen in relation to each other, because I give you examples. In one of my previous companies, I don't give the name because it wouldn't be nice. My wonderful procurement guys decided to reduce working capital. They said, okay, instead of buying 100 items, we buy 10 times 10. So at the end of the month, I have still bought 100 items, but my cost of logistics are going up. Lorenzo, you're not doing your job properly. And I said, guys, hang on a minute. We used to receive one pallet of 100 items. Now we receive 10 times 10 pallets, 10 items. That means my transactional costs receiving the goods are 10 times bigger. It's like you going to the supermarket and buy one egg every day, or you buy 12 or 24 and you bring it home. So there's variable costs that impact your logistics, even though the volumes are the same. So you need to be understanding of what decisions have been taken in other functions that will impact your cost of logistics. So with metrics, they look at cost. They say costs are going up, volumes are not changing, so there has to be something different here. what is driving the cost up if volumes are the same? Same with the sales guys, going back to the original question you asked me before. Some customers wanted ours to ship products for their customers, so for the customer's customers. So instead of shipping 100 items, I had to pack 10 times 10, stupid example, so that they just pick the product and ship it to their customers. So I've done the job for them, which is fine, but my picking costs are going up, my consumable cost is going up, my performance is slowed down because I pick 10 times 10 of picking 100 items at a time. So a lot of variables are impacted by decisions taken by other functions. So you have to be very much aware of what will happen to the link between cost, volume, and performance, so that you know how to handle this more effectively. Another important one is the cost structure that you have with your logistics supplier, especially warehousing operations. Excuse me. Will it be essentially there's three kinds of cost structures. One is not very often used, is sort of all in. Give you a small business, you charge me X $1,000 per year a month, I do everything for you. Maybe if it's a small business, that can be a workable one. Otherwise, you've got cost plus, or based on the management fee. So I charge you transparency of cost, plus I get my management fee, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10%, whatever. So, but I show you my real cost. Or I've got activity-based. I charge you per activity, or ABC, activity-based costing, which means every transaction I spend some money. So it is important to make sure you don't end up with 10 deliveries of 10 or 100 deliveries of 1, because every time the supplier receives one item, they scan it, that's a transaction, I receive the goods, and it charges you something. So it will charge you 100 times an inbound instead of charging you one time an inbound of 100 items. So likewise, if volumes go up and this was not forecasted in your plan with your supplier, I gave my supplier a plan of, say, 10,000 shipping lines. I now have 15,000 shipping lines, and my budget was based on 10,000 shipping lines, but I'm actually shipping many more. So that means my costs are going up. So or if you don't give enough volumes to your supplier, he will come back and say, I gave you the rate per line based on an assumed volume. I hired people in my warehouse that are doing the work for you. You don't give me work, but so I cannot invoice you, but I still have to pay cost to my employees in the warehouse that I've hired for you, for your business. So you got to be careful that you select a min-max range that allows you to estimate better the expectation of cost. So there's a lot of metrics you can measure: productivity per person, plus in some countries you cannot do it. For example, in Germany, it's not allowed, so you cannot tag the productivity to a single operator, but only to a group of people, inbound or outbound. So, whereas in the States, you go there, you've got Mr. John Smith has a performance on 92%, and Mrs. Jennifer, whatever, she's got 85. So you can actually tag the performance to each single person. See what you can do, going again, talking about the legal compliance and what you can do, what you cannot do. So a lot of metrics you can use to measure your supply performance, but the most important one, share as much as you can with them, because if you don't share with them, they'll be in the dark, their rates will not be accurate, and so they come back with additional cost, or you end up spending more than you should because you don't give them a true expectation of your business. So that's very important, to set measurable metrics and to monitor them daily and address deviations as soon as they happen. Start asking why. Why is this happening? What's the impact? If this continues to happen, what's going to happen to our network? What's going to happen to our customer experience? Are we going to have delays in customs clearance? So that's going to create issues with the country that we want to ship to, and so on. So a lot about, especially if you're a social business, you have to really be able to control something that is not under your, technically not under your responsibility, because it's been done by a third party. So
yeah,
long answer, but essentially that's a lot that we could have a call just.
We could talk all day. Yes.
Oh God, yes, absolutely, yes.
We could talk all day. I mean, I also, in the past, we had experience where we would say the customer would have a request, for example, that there's a law change and they need to have, let's say, a label on, they need to have a label in some language, and usually it's some small language. You know, it's last minute because it's a new law and they decided yesterday that from tomorrow or from tonight.
Or maybe people knew for months, but they didn't tell logistics guys, and then you have to go and relabel everything in the warehouse to make it compliant. Otherwise, you're going to have issues.
Or you have to decide: do I have the option? Is it cheaper for me to relabel this product maybe in a customs warehouse in the country of destination.
Exactly.
And do I have the option to use some students, and will they be accurate enough? Will they do it in a quality?
What's the cost of doing it? How long will it take? Yeah. And of course, sorry, I forgot one thing. Obviously, you asked me about metrics to measure, KPIs to measure supply performance. Of course, we've got other sets of metrics which are all related to what truly matters to customers. So the customer side of metrics, so the external metrics, but that's of course something else. But yeah, indeed, like you say, it's very important when you're outsourcing the business to understand how to measure the performance and how to handle variability like this one about the labeling. Typically that happens, the compliance is a very important thing. If you're not compliant, your products will not be accepted. In some countries you have pre-shipment inspection. If you ship to Africa, there's a lot of pre-shipment inspection. If you ship to Saudi Arabia, you've got the SASO inspection. I think there's another one for another country, the Middle East, I can't remember. It's got a similar.
Iran has also quite
plus restrictions and stuff. Yes. So there's a lot you need to be aware of that will either delay your shipment, because you say the shipment is ready, cannot ship because we're waiting for the pre-shipment inspection, or we're waiting for the final invoice that needs to be validated by Chamber of Commerce, legalization, or certificate of origin. A lot of things you have to be aware of to make sure that everything is planned. So I would say don't rush too much to sell. For the pleasure of selling something, you end up burning yourself because you've done it too fast, too soon. So at the cost of selling something now, you're jeopardizing your reputation or your business because you didn't calculate all the areas, all the aspects. So maybe invest a little more in acquiring internal awareness of all the operations, of all the technicalities, so that once you do it, you're fully compliant and business will be smooth and not having something that then it's a blocker later on in the supply chain, because that would be waste of resources and time and frustration with the customer and so on.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm talking with clients about building usually in the concept of building relationships within Asia, then I always say go slow to go fast later. But I think with this kind of project is exactly the same thing. You need to spend the time in the beginning to look at really what you need and to actually go about it systematically and strategically. Yes. And then afterwards, the operations part, the actual execution can go through much more smoothly.
Yeah.
And even if you don't like to work in this way, it actually is less headache in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm thinking about, if you expand the thing, think about IT systems. What systems do you have? What systems does your supplier have? How do you link? How do you get visibility of your goods in transit? How do you communicate with them? Goods are ready for pickup. How do you track city? There's a lot that depends also on IT systems. So you've got to be thinking about how the systems will support your execution phase, let's say. So there's a lot of things that are to be taken into consideration here. And of course, the product cost is important. Sorry, another one, because, or talking about cost as well, the product is important because, like I mentioned before, remember I was saying we were shipping the goods by sea freight and customers were asking for a compensation already because the products were already obsolete. But at the same time, also the product cost in itself will be a key factor to determine, can I afford to ship it by air, or is it too much, or do I ship it by sea? But then by sea, you've got a much longer transit time. So you've got to consider everything into the equation. Do I want to get the products to the customers fast at a higher cost, or do I can afford to ship it with a longer lead time if customers are okay, unless you have a local warehouse of local stock, but then spend much less in transportation. So the cost of the products is a very important one. Some people measure logistics as a percentage of sales, which is cost of logistics as a percentage of sales, which is good and bad indicator, because if prices go up, cost of logistics will go down, but effectively cost may be the same, just the percentage as goes down. So there's a lot you can play with numbers and in logistics. So that's very good. It's a very nice way to look at things under different perspectives.
Yeah. And I guess also at the moment from Central Europe, you have this, if you're looking to go east, you also have the option of the middle way, let's say, of putting the goods on the train. And for certain types of goods, either very bulky and very heavy or very high value, but you need a faster transit time than sea freight, but you can't afford the air freight, then the train can also be a
also option. They do. Yeah, from Asia they do this. Yeah, from Asia, they also do this thing called combo, which is a combination of air and sea. So typically from Asia, you would ship to, say, air to Dubai. Oh, sorry. You ship air to Dubai and then sea from Dubai to Europe or vice versa. Sometimes you go by train. There's a lot of rail business that is starting to pick up finally from Asia, from China, essentially, into Europe, which is great. You just have to consider all factors to know, the famous equation: cost and lead time and inventory and working capital and so on, and compliance and documentation and hiccups at customs and all that.
Yeah, and I really don't like to mention it, but for this year we have to: COVID and supply chains. I'm sure this is every supply chain guy's or every operation guy's favorite topic in this year. We heard a lot in April and May. Let's say it was very present in the media in April and May that companies were suffering, that they couldn't get product out of China, obviously from February time when China was closed, or that they couldn't source raw materials. This morning I read about Apple resourcing or moving production of, I think, iPad and MacBook from Busan to 2 hours across the border into Vietnam to their factory.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
how are things affected COVID, generally? Is it?
You can look at it from various perspectives. Some companies, sadly, but good for them, are happy because they made a lot of money with, medical materials. So
must have made a killing.
Sorry?
DHL must have made a killing.
No, I mean, I'm not only talking about the logistics transportation companies, but also the actual manufacturers that made a lot of money because they started developing more and more. Even the ones who adapted, they showed adaptability, so they started developing masks or other items or gels and stuff they were not building, they were not manufacturing before. So good for them. In general, I think there's been, like you mentioned rightly, in February, March, China was stuck. Europe was still enjoying the COVID-free environment, so we were having issues because the ports were closed, and so goods cannot ship. So vessels were holding. Especially, we had issues the other way around. Also, I was speaking to friends in the maritime industry. Think about goods they have to be shipped on a reefer container, so a refrigerated containers. Ports were basically closed. There was not enough places where to plug the containers on the dock to be fed the electricity. They need to stay at the right temperature, so they were keeping vessels on the sea to keep the goods at the right temperature before they could actually find the spot and find a place for the containers to be hooked up on. There's been a lot of considerations around inventory, around risk management. So the products or the companies who had single source products, they started thinking maybe we should source from multiple locations so that we got assurance that if one lane is shut down, we can supply products from others. Maybe we should have a more present, more stronger presence of small temporary warehouses in different countries so you can support domestic demand, ensuring uninterrupted supplies. There's been issues with that working capital, of course, because working capital is a big issue. If you think about all the big listed companies, they have a lot of dependencies on what gets communicated every quarter to the stock market. So, of course, working capital is a big one. Now, I wonder if those big companies will review their inventory policies because there has to be a certain level of compromise. The just-in-time and the very short level of lean inventories may not be the winning formula, because if something else happens, you're stuck, you have no more supplies, so you have to have a certain higher buffer. So a lot has changed in terms of global distribution, in terms of transit times, in terms of physical distribution of warehouses. What else? Some companies understood maybe we can still stay with one supplier, but we want our supplier to have to ship from different locations, or we go and buy from different suppliers just in case. Yeah. There's been issues also on the logistics side, of course, because now you see what's going on now. The rates are going up crazily for sea freight business, and there's a lot of congestion that is starting to pile up in the west coast of the US. You know, there's a lot of things that have been impacted by COVID, and so that means contingency planning to a certain extent. That means having an agile supply chain that can be responsive to change, that can flex to meet new requirements based on what your business model is, based on what your products are, based on where your suppliers are located, based on how you assess risks, how you did assess your risks before, and how you do that again now, because now it's become a must for those who hadn't planned it that way. So a lot has changed because of COVID. It's made us more aware of, in a way, it's not a nice thing to say, but as a supply chain guy, there's some justice to what we do, which means people have understood the importance of supply chain, of physical transportation, of compliance, because otherwise people just buy things and they don't wonder what's behind it. There's a lot of what we're discussing: planning, communication, compliance, performance management, physical transportation, warehousing, stock decisions. So a lot of decisions are taken in supply chain, but until something bad happens, people think it's easy. You just ship it and it goes. There's a lot that goes behind it. And so if you see, for example, more higher level, there's a lot of talks about, the CSCO functions, chief supply chain officers having to be on the board because they bring a real awareness of the business end to end. All functions interact with supply chain at some point. There's a lot that needs to be reassessed when we talk about important functions in a company. Supply chain certainly is a very peculiar one. And now with this pandemic, unfortunately, we've understood much more the importance of the reputation that this function has to have in a company.
Yeah. So it's been really very, very interesting, this discussion today. If we could sum up, what would be your one top tip for people who are just starting out with their international business?
One only?
One only. You have to choose. We're taking a priority.
I'll stick with two if you don't mind. One, then you choose the one you prefer. One is acquire local intelligence, which means go and see in the market what are their criteria for performance management, what are their expectations, what are the local habits, what are local compliance, customs, tax implications, which will have an impact on the outside. But also know your business very much, which means communicate with your peers, with your partners, with your internally, because you have to be aware from the very beginning of what happens in a supply chain so that you don't have last minute surprises. So hyper awareness on the outside, go visit the country, understand what local requirements are, but also know your business much more, because if you don't communicate internally, you demonstrate you're not knowing your business well enough. So sometimes asking a question it's worth much more than I don't bother, and then things happen. I wish I'd known, I wish you told me. So there has to be complete exchange of information, and then you'll be able to control your cost in a better way, your expectations in a much better way.
Thank you.
And of course, of course, other things could be from a personal point of view, could be like I mentioned, share, so that you share more with people who will benefit from your knowledge, but also learn, for always willing to learn, continuous learning, extend your capabilities to parallel or adjacent areas, which means, for example, in my humble case, I've traveled, I've changed countries, I've changed companies to learn more about how supply chain applies differently to different industries, to different company cultures. You think about, for example, technology. I've tried to take some certifications in technology, which is not my core business, but of course technology is becoming an enabler of supply chain. So you want to be sure that you know what technology exists that can help you do your business better or in a more cost-effective way, or to give you more visibility. So be eager to learn, eager to ask questions, because that will be the key factor to help you improve your business. If you know things, this will not come as a surprise, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I can only confirm that, because I also had the experience that the more, let's say, the more knowledge round about the operations that I could give from my sales markets to my supply chain colleagues, then the better they were able to support me to support my customers. So it's, let's say, it's, everybody needs to be aware of this importance of communication and and to make sure that everybody's aware about the specifics of different markets.
Yeah,
Why do
yeah,
they
yeah,
need
yeah.
this? They're not just being a pain in the proverbial.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
need
yeah.
it for some reason. Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much some high level. We could have discussed much more, of course, but there's a lot,
Yes.
that
No, it's been really great to talk to you today, and very, very interesting. I'm sure we could talk for the whole day on these topics,
yes,
because
yes.
these are topics
I
that
like it.
I
So,
think both of us interested in them very, very much.
yeah, yeah.
Where can people go to find out more about you, or if they're thinking that maybe they would like to ask you about some support for their business, where can they go to
Sure.
find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. My profile is there, visible. I also invite you maybe to have a look at some of this. I'm not a great poster. I don't post too much stuff on LinkedIn. Maybe I should, because sometimes I see things and I say, of course I know this. Why do they post this? I know it already. So it's difficult to think, what could I post that people do not know that really adds value, right? But then you realize maybe it's because I've got gray hair. So you start understanding, maybe you've learned a lot. So anyway. So LinkedIn, and I've got a few posts in there which are very much relevant, high level, to the conversation we had about aligning strategy to execution, which means what you sell as a strategy to a customer in terms of generating expectation, and what you have to be aware of when you build your costs, awareness of what it means to ship to another country. So there's an example about Indonesia, and another one about a little technology thing around these stores, unmanned stores, where you go in. At least when I was in China until a few months ago, you go there and there's no interaction with anybody, because there you just scan your thing, you scan your WeChat,
Scan your face or scan your WeChat. Yes.
Exactly. RFID knows already what you bought, pay, go out. Fantastic. With a couple of complications from a data safety perspective, data security, but otherwise the one around Indonesia is very nice document that I think it's simple, but it makes you think a lot. And you see some of the other posts, some of the other podcasts that I've done. There's a famous football player who's got my name, so a lot of that stuff will come before me. But at some point you find some of my posts on in my LinkedIn, or if you type my name. But there's not much, but I enjoy having some interviews here and there. So it's been a pleasure to do this one with you as well. Hopefully, I think our mission is to generate awareness, because It's good to share, it's good to learn, but also it's good to avoid problems. So the more we share, the more people know. So the smoother will be the business that we are working in. And so, yeah, just you find me, or you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, no problem. And like I mentioned, some podcasts, you find them on the web. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good.
It's been brilliant.
Pleasure.
Okay,
So
thank you.
enjoy the rest
Bye-bye.
of the conference, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.